Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to address a topic which you probably have never heard before, the religion of progressivism. As a matter of fact, I have not heard it myself before because this is a very brand new presentation and I will give it here for the first time. So we'll see how it goes. So I really don't have a real feel for how long it will take. And this is why I gave a little warning to you initially. But I can stop at any time. So if I see heads nodding and if I realize that I'm probably the only one who is still awake I think I will stop at that moment. So just bear with me and we'll see how it goes. It's a bit more spontaneous than I'm used to. But I thought I need to prepare this message and I need to have some people listening to me at least once. So you're more or less my guinea pigs today. I hope it will still be a kind of beneficial experience for you. But progressivism is a religion. This is what you have to keep in mind. Because you are confronted by progressivism in one form or another every single day. You need to turn on your TV, or once you turn on your TV, you will be bombarded by messages which proclaim progressivism in all its shades and forms and variations. And they come in very different forms and variations. So you need to understand, what is it? You need to understand its very nature in order to detect it in the different ways it comes into your life. It tries to intrude into your life, and basically the way it does it is by affecting your thinking. This is how it's being done. Your thinking is being conditioned to think in a certain way, which progressivism basically tells you to. And obviously, once your thinking is conditioned, your behavior is also being controlled. This is why I wrote in that subtitle, Religion in the Service of Social Control, because this is the objective. Progressivism is put into place by certain individuals, and usually they are the most powerful individuals in a specific society, especially here in this society in America, but also in Germany and England and different other, mostly Western countries. So America is not the only country by any stretch of the imagination, but obviously it's also very present in this country, and this is why I chose America as my example, because you can relate the best. Obviously, if I take America as the example, this is our environment we live in. The ultimate objective is social control. Now there are two ways, at least two ways, how this can be accomplished. One way is to force you by bare, brute force, to compel you by brute force to do certain things which you would not necessarily do on your own accord. Right? Best example, paying taxes. Would you like to do this every year at a certain period of the year in April? Pay taxes? Why do you do it? Because there's a stronger force behind that obligation which forces you to do it. Otherwise you wouldn't. So that is one way of exercising social control. Social control truly means to condition the behavior of a certain nation. The individuals in that particular nation need to behave in a certain way. And you're conditioned to pay your taxes at the least on April 15th. And if you don't, well, there are very negative consequences befalling you shortly thereafter. And you know that, and this is why you do it. But there's a different way how your behavior can be conditioned. Now, using pure force is not the most efficient. Because the moment the force is let up, due to certain circumstances, maybe the government will run out of power, if this is possible, and cannot exercise that kind of control over you, you will cease to do it right away. So the government has to exercise that control, that power constantly in order to compel you to do that kind of thing. But that is not the most efficient way. So people who really want to control your behavior have come up with certain other ways to compel you to do something you would not do on your own. But you still do it. And this is by going inside your mind and conditioning your thinking. The moment they have achieved that purpose, they have done their work. Because the moment they have convinced you to do certain things, and they say, well, this is very beneficial to you if you do X, Y, Z. If I think it's very good for me, well, I will do it in most cases. So they want to reach inside your brain. And how do they do it? They are very apt to do it. Now, never underestimate the powers of those who want to control your life. Never underestimate their abilities to, in some ways, convince you to do certain things which you would not do, but they convinced you to do it and you do it. And they are very apt because they have lots of practice and lots of time. It's really ongoing exercise, and they have perfected that method over the centuries, not just over the decades. Over centuries, they have perfected that method of reaching into your mind and directing your life any way they choose. And you don't even realize it, how they do it. And this is much more effective. Because in some ways you think, oh, this is just something I do. I have chosen to do certain things. And I follow through with my decisions. And there are certain outcomes, certain consequences. But ultimately you think you have done that. You have decided to do that. While in reality, it's someone else who has made that decision, and they just conditioned you to think that it was your decision. And you don't even realize it. This is why it's so important to really think about that particular scenario or that particular topic in some detail, in some in some detail, so that we understand the method the other side uses to make me do things which I really wouldn't do otherwise. And there are two most effective ways to do it. By doing it, I mean to condition your thinking. Two very effective means. And I will address one of the two in this particular presentation. Perhaps I may allude to the other along the way, but right now I just focus on one particular method of the two, because it's perhaps the most effective of all of them. The other one is very effective too, but perhaps not the most effective. The most effective method is to mess with theology. This is the most effective way to condition your thinking. And that doesn't sound very intuitive initially. Messing with theology, how does that affect my own thinking? Well, you will see the longer we go into that particular presentation. It does affect you most intimately. And this is why we have to think about it in greater detail. And it's the theology of modernism. It's really modernism. Modernism is in some ways just a synonym for progressivism. Now there are certain subtle differences in regards to the two terms. I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details and differences, but let's just use the term modernism as a synonym for progressivism. Another synonym would be liberalism. So I could call it the liberal theology or theology of liberalism, or the theology of progressivism, I use these terms interchangeably for the purpose of this presentation. And then you may ask the question once again, what's the relevance of that particular topic to me? I have never ever opened a book which contained liberal theology. That's the furthest on my mind to do. I never concerned myself with liberal theology as such. So what's the relevance to my own life? Well, you will see it becomes very relevant very quickly. Because behind liberal theology or the theology of modernism is a certain purpose, and that purpose will affect your life in the deepest recesses of your mind. And this is why liberal theology is so insidious, so evil. Because you think, oh, it's way over there. Never reaches me. I'm way over here. I go to a very nice church where I will always hear sermons which are based on the Bible, are biblical, and liberal theology, well, people over in that church, that liberal Methodist or Presbyterian church, are fools to go to that church, but I will never darken the door of that bad church over there. So, I'm not affected by it, but the truth of the matter is you are. You just don't know it. And this is why that method is so effective, because you think you are not affected, while in reality you are. In the deepest recesses, as I said already, in the deepest recesses of your mind, you are affected. And what we need to do, and this is perhaps the punchline, the conclusion I will come to eventually, is we need to cut off that communication stream into our minds. We need to cut it off. And it must be radical. It must be a radical decision to make, and we have to follow through with that decision, because in some ways we are addicted. And I believe the word addicted is not too strongly chosen. We are addicted to that stream of progressivism reaching into our minds and conditioning our lives, and ultimately messing up our lives altogether. This is why the problems are not necessarily all out there in the world. They have come into the churches just as much, because if we are not willing to cut off that information stream determining our minds and lives. So let's just look at the 5 identifying features. One of them is process theology, rejection of the doctrine of God as the absolutely sovereign creator. Now, slowly but surely you understand why I chose the specific topic I did regards to Revelation. Because obviously I had that particular presentation in mind when I was thinking of the selection of a specific Bible passage or biblical topic I would address in my earlier sermon. Once again, put it on its head. So if this is the way progressivism reaches into our minds, trying to diminish our understanding of God's sovereignty, what do we need to do in order to guard ourselves, guard our mind and heart, for that message to actually enter into us? It is to uphold, to confirm, to proclaim the message of God's sovereignty. And I mean absolute sovereignty. And how can we do this in the best possible way? How can we affirm and be conditioned to think about God's sovereignty? Well, I gave you the answer already. It is by reading the book of Revelation, and don't stop with just reading that. Read your whole Bible, because the whole Bible is a testimony to the sovereignty of God. So if you don't want to be influenced by that other message which will mess up your life, spend your time reading and studying the scriptures. There's no better way to do it when doing it in that way. Now, liberal theology or the theology of modernism uses fancy terms, fancy terminology to throw you off. Right? If you hear these terms, you think, oh, I never heard that term before. I have no idea what it means. Process theology? What's the meaning of that particular term? Well, if I don't understand it, it has nothing to do with me, right? Right? I don't understand what it means, but there's no relevance behind that term in regards to my own personal life. Well, I gave you the definition. It's a short definition. The fight of a denial of God's sovereignty. This is what stands behind that term. So if you encounter process theology in one way or the other, think about that particular definition I gave it. And also mentally guard yourself in regards to that message. That's the first. Higher criticism of the Bible. Once again, it's part of liberal theology, right? This is what we equate with liberal theology. One is the same as the other. Higher criticism of the Bible. And once again, I am not explaining all the details of it. On my bookshelves at home, or in the books which are in storage still in Germany, I have cases upon cases of books filled with liberal theology and books which are based on higher criticism. Why do I concern myself with these books? Why did I purchase them? Spend good money to purchase these really bad, rotten books? Why do I spend time reading those? And a little side note, when we have visitors come to us, we don't have a spare guest room, so usually they are put up in my study, surrounded by all these wonderful books. And almost the very first thing I have to tell them is that don't look too closely at the titles, because most of them are heretical. Because this is what I usually do if I'm invited to go to stay at someone's place. I just meander over to the bookshelves and just look at the books, and my guests usually do that too. And then I think I'm totally off the wall, having these books on my shelves. Well, I do read them, not for my own pleasure, but for my own personal interest. I read them because I want to know what they say so that I can guard my heart against it. I need to know what it is. And that's the whole purpose of this presentation anyway. So Darwinism, well, you just need to go to the Columbus Zoo or the Natural Museum or Museum of Natural Science in Washington, D.C., or many other metropolitan cities like Basel and Berlin. You just need to go to these museums or zoos, and just about every second flag you read is, in some ways, a message promoting Darwinism. Would you agree with me? Have you been at the zoo? Yes. Universalism, the denial of a doctrine of final judgment. Well, this is what liberal theology is all about. It's the denial that God will judge us. Will judge us if we don't believe in Him, if we reject His truth. No, there will be no judgment following that particular decision of mine. Well, what is the best antidote again? The best means to combat that particular wrong thinking, that there is no negative consequence following my particular life decision to reject Jesus Christ as my Lord. Read the book of Revelation. Not the whole book, but major parts of that particular book speak about what? Judgment on the ungodly. There is a judgment coming. We need to take this into account, because this is being denied by that kind of theology, the theology of modernism. Ecumenism. I wrote a whole book on ecumenism, on the early history of the ecumenical movement, or ecumenical movement. I think I always mess that particular word up with my particular German accent. it means that we can come together as different denominations, Christian denominations, and have fellowship with one another. It doesn't matter what you truly believe about certain doctrines of the Bible. We can still have fellowship and can engage in certain social actions together. And it's always better if we group together, band together, and try to accomplish certain good deeds. What you believe is secondary or of no consequence necessarily. You can deny the deity of Jesus, and we can still have fellowship with one another. And the same goes beyond the confines of the Christian church, right? We can have fellowship with my Muslim neighbor, just like I can have fellowship with my Christian friend over here. No problem. We're all peace-loving and want to pursue the same life goals which I cherish and hold dear. And we can band together and accomplish those positive things in society. Well, the news is, it's a lie. It's a lie. There's a difference between those who follow Jesus wholeheartedly and those who reject his claim of sovereignty or his lordship. There's a huge difference between the two groups, and ultimately there are only these two groups. So here we have the 5 identifying features. Now, once again, the question to you is, yes, I agree with you. You don't want to have anything to do with liberal theology. I do agree with you. But are you influenced? Is your thinking influenced by certain aspects of liberal theology? If you turn on the TV, if you open your newspaper, if you listen to a radio broadcast, if you go to a zoo, if you go to primary school and secondary school, and if you go to a university and get a master's degree and a doctoral degree, are you influenced by the thinking or by the ideas and ideals of modernism? The answer is a resounding yes. Yes. And you are influenced by it every single day, without exception. Especially in our society. You are influenced by it. You cannot get away from it. The only way how you can guard your heart from that particular influence to change your own perspective on life is to cut it off. Cut it off. Now, obviously, you cannot, or it becomes more and more difficult, right? How can you cut off the influence of liberalism or progressivism in primary school? One way to do it, it's not the only way, but one way to do it is to homeschool. I'm not saying all of you have to homeschool. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying it's a very good idea for some, perhaps most, to homeschool. Because this is one way to guard the mind and heart of your child from being influenced by that very insidious evil thought stream or stream of ideas reaching way deep into its soul and determining the life of that little child already at a very early age, when that child doesn't have any way of guarding itself against it. It worked out extremely well, at least from the perspective of Joy and myself. It worked out extremely well for us as parents to homeschool our 2 children for most of their education. Estelle went to 1st grade, but when we pulled her out, because we lived in the southern part of Germany in the Black Forest area. The Black Forest area was never penetrated by the Reformation 500 years earlier. So it stayed as pagan can get. As a matter of fact, the daughter of the Mansels came to visit us in February, and we tried to slowly ease her into that specific situation which she would encounter just going on the street. We taught her, well, you will see witches on the street at every street corner when we go to a different place. So, witches, I've never seen a witch up close. Yes, you will see it. And we drove to a restaurant, and she was looking right and left, saw all these very strange people running around in their costumes. And then she said, that looks very weird. Because it was very weird. Indeed, in February, they come all out and parade themselves on the streets in very funny costumes, in very bad, evil-looking costumes as such. And then we went into the restaurant, and on every table was a little figurine. A little witch on every single table. A little figurine dangling on a little stand. So once we heard that every single first grade student at the primary school in the Black Forest needed to participate at these witch coven events, mandatorily participating, we said, we have to do something. And one thing was, no, Esther, you're not going to that. And secondly, let's think of plans to pull her out of the school system. And as I said, it worked out very well. But we had, after 3 years of doing it, we had to move to Switzerland because the authorities cracked down on those who were homeschooling their children in Germany. So they said, okay, we give you two options. One option is to move to France, and the second option is to move to Switzerland. These are the two options we give you. Would you be willing, if someone would say, well, you teach your children at home, but from now on, you have two options to move to Mexico or to move to Canada. These are your options. What would you do? We moved to Switzerland, and after roughly 6 years, even though it's legal, totally legal in one of the cantons, which is like a state, the authorities once again cracked down on those who were doing homeschooling, not just us, but also Swiss families. And they just made it so difficult for us, even though it's legal, they made it so difficult for us that we couldn't continue. And they knew we couldn't continue. And then Joy and I said, well, okay, and by the providence of God, we moved to the United States. Teaching our children at home is so important to us in order to cut off that evil stream of ideas coming into their minds of progressivism. It is so important for us to guard our children from that evil influence, that we are willing to move to Switzerland and then being willing to move to the United States. By God's providence and how we were able to finish educating them at home. And Joy was doing most of the work, almost all of the work. Now this is one way, but there are many other ways how you can guard your own thinking from being influenced by these kind of ideas, which all of them try to draw you away from the Bible, draw you away from God, from following Jesus Christ. That's what it does. Because the moment you're outside of fellowship with Jesus, you are fair prey. You have no protection whatsoever. And they will pounce on you. You just need to look out how many wrecked lives there are just around us. They pounce on you and destroy you. This is what they want to do. They're not kind. They're not helpful. They don't want to help you along to be successful in life. They want to exploit you and destroy you. That's just what they do. So we need to guard ourselves from that particular influence. Denial of God's sovereignty. No absolute creator-creature distinction. Very important point. I cannot stress this more than I do. Not enough. I cannot stress it enough. Now you may once again think, oh, it has nothing to do with my life. But, well, hold on. I'll show you how much it does influence your own thinking. Well, you go into a church, you think it's a biblical church. Yes, okay. Perhaps it calls itself evangelical or Baptist or whatever. But you feel very confident but it is a church where you hear the gospel being preached faithfully. I get that, and obviously this is what you should do. But you think that that kind of false theology can creep into that particular church just as well, without you even knowing that it actually happens? Well, how does it happen? Usually it starts at the top, and by the top I mean in the seminaries. The future pastors are being trained to accept that kind of theology, and I mean the evangelical seminaries. I'm not talking about liberal seminaries. Liberal seminaries, okay, this is what they teach and nothing but. So how do they do it? How are these future pastors are being conditioned to accept that kind of teaching? And what it truly means, no absolute creator-creature distinction, means that if there's no clear difference between God as being God, being divine, and me being a mere creature of His, not being divine. If that distinction is being blurred, this means that I can assume or I can aspire to become divine myself, right? There's no clear distinction between the two. If this is God, and I'm most certainly not in that kind of category, I'm just a mere creature, someone who was created by that kind of God, by that divine God. If that distinction is being blurred, I might as well become divine myself. Well, in our ears, if I just mention that, in our ears, it sounds like rave heresy. Right? I can become God. That sounds like Mormonism. They're all on that path, becoming gods themselves. That's Mormonism. And obviously I've never been inside a Mormon church. It's creepy. And I have been in Salt Lake City and have seen that cathedral, and it looks creepy to me. And I'm glad I don't have to live in Salt Lake City. Gives me a bad feeling just to be in that city in the airport. No. We are here in Columbus, Ohio, attending Fellowship Bible Chapel. Well, there's an annual gathering of evangelical theology professors. It's an organization called Evangelical Theological Society, ETS, Evangelical Theological Society, ETS. And it's the place where just about every evangelical theology professor goes to every year to listen to different presentations and then to have interaction with others, and possibly also to find the college presidents or seminary presidents to get a better job offer. Now, that particular society also publishes a journal of the Evangelical Theological Society. In that journal, they published an article not too long ago, 2009, I believe it was. With the title, I cannot quote it verbatim. I forgot the specific wording of it, but the meaning of the title and the gist of the entire article of perhaps 10 to 15 pages was, "You can become God yourself." And it was not an article which says, "Oh, this is rave heresy." It was an article meant to influence the thinking and teaching of evangelical theology professors to adopt that particular doctrine, and then to teach that to their students who will eventually become pastors of churches. And where is the outcry? There was no outcry. Why was there no outcry? Because most of these professors are on that page, on that side of the equation. That particular professor of theology should have been ejected or thrown out of that particular organization right away. Instead, they published his whole article and promote it to all of the others. Isn't that a wonderful, glorious idea? We can become gods ourselves. Now, this was called, or the technical term is the theosis doctrine. Theosis doctrine. That theosis doctrine used to be the most severe heresy of the Christian church. Considered over many centuries to be the most troublesome heresy of all. Well, there's a theologian in England. He is the president of Evangelical School of Theology, a seminary. He has been invited by some very well-known pastors here in the United States to be one of the main speakers at their national conferences. And this just happened a few weeks ago. He was at one of the main speakers, and then a few days later he was invited to be the main speaker of another one. And the pastor of the church we attend now went to the second, as he does every year. And shortly before he went, a few days before he went, he came to visit us, since we had just joined the church. And we were just talking. I just mentioned the name of that British theologian. He said, "Oh yes, he is one of the speakers at the conference I'm going to in a few days." Or at least this is what I said to him. And yes, he was the main speaker of that conference last year, and I attended. I thought he was a very good speaker. Well, I know that particular name. I never met him personally, but I know the name. I know what he teaches. I actually read his doctoral dissertation, which is a free download from the internet. You can have easy access to the doctoral dissertation of that particular theologian, who is now the president of a evangelical seminary in Great Britain, coming to the United States to be the main speaker at very well-known national conferences, evangelical conferences. And the title of his dissertation, his doctoral thesis, was A Christological Anthropology of Irenaeus and Calvin. Would you pick up that kind of work, that kind of thesis, even though it's a free download as a PDF, and just read through it, see what he truly believes? And once you have done that, you will come to the conclusion, this is what he believes. This is what he believes. And this is what he proclaims at these evangelical national conferences. And he's not just invited once, he's invited next year and the year past that, to influence as many American pastors as he possibly can. And he's very adept in pulling in his audience. He's a very good speaker, very engaging speaker, a much better speaker than I am. He's pulling them in. And I don't have a clue what he promotes. Not a clue. Because if I would, if the organizers, very, very famous American pastors, the organizers of these national conferences know, I would take the time to at least study a little bit about the background of that theologian and read some of his books. But I would very quickly come to that same conclusion I have come to. This is what he promotes. And it just seeps into these conferences, and the conferences, it seeps into the churches due to the pastors attending these conferences, and when you are listening to that message. By you, I mean general, people going to the churches. I'm not meaning here at this particular church. Once again, impossibility of creation out of nothing. That's at the base of Darwinism. So these are just different ways to describe what I initially told you about, the 5 different identifying distinctives. It's once again process theology, generic process theology, and Darwinism. Creation is described by all of Scripture as a creative act of God in 6 days, and thus it must be understood as act, not process. As act, not process. The creative acts are not only perfect and final, they are totally supernatural. There's a nice little definition of what we as Christians believe in regards to creationism. And every single word, and I obviously emphasize a few of these words, act in particular, are very important for us to know. Because this is the only way how we can defend ourselves against the other message which comes to us by many different channels, which tries to persuade us that nothing of that, what I affirm in this particular definition, is true. You probably won't recognize that face. I would be very surprised if you would know the name of that individual. He was a professor of theology at the University of Chicago at the turn of the century, 19th to 20th century. His name was Siler Matthews. Siler Matthews. He was the dean of the theology department at the time. Obviously, the University of Chicago is the Rockefeller University. They endowed it and financed it and promoted it. So this was really their way, the Rockefellers' way, to spread liberal theology, the theology of modernism, progressivism in American society by setting up that, or at least endowing that university, and then hiring theology professors such as Siler Matthews. I'm just giving you a few quotes out of some of his books. The modern age is primarily scientific and controlled by the conception of process. Okay, he wrote this more than 100 years ago. What is he saying? What is he saying? Is this biblical? He's a theology professor. Remember, he's teaching future pastors. And he defined the modern age by these specific adjectives or nouns, controlled by the conception of process. What is behind process again? We develop. That's the idea. We develop into something else. What's that something else? Right? There's no distinction in their mind. There's no distinction between creature and the divine. We develop into what? Posing a question is answering it. We develop into a higher species, and the higher species ultimately assumes divinity. This is what he's saying here. Would you have understood the meaning of what he was communicating by just reading that quote? Probably not. And this is why that seminar is so important, just to teach you to understand what they truly mean by using such terms. Process. It's a process. We become divine ourselves. This is what he says. Once again, it's a theosis doctrine. It's the most grievous heresy of the Christian faith. Modern world's conception of, quote, God as immanent in this process rather than an extra mundane monarch, end of quote. So these are just different examples in which he just formulated the same idea which I already explained to you in different ways. And that's the source. It's one of his books, The Gospel and the Modern Man, 1910, over 100 years ago. And that message is being proclaimed over and over and over and over again. Now, during that time, how they promoted that particular message was by means of the churches, because most people were still churchgoers at that time. So, in order to have the strongest impact on general public, on the general mind, they knew we have to condition the thinking of the future pastors, meaning the theology students, with this kind of message, or writing a book and then distributing these books to the pastors who are already pastors. Nowadays, the percentage of people going to churches, at least Bible-believing churches, is rather small in comparison. So they use other means to accomplish the very same thing. Well, the most effective way how they proclaim the very same message in different ways, but it's the same message nowadays, is by means of movies. And let me just say it, I may ruffle some feathers, but just let me say it. Movies like The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's movies based on the novels of Tolkien, and all the fantasy movies, all of them. Marvel, all of them. Captain America, Batman, Spider-Man, the whole gamut. Supergirls, Superman, the whole gamut, all of them promote that message. Oops, I pressed it accidentally, but it's the same message. Put into a different package. A package which is much more appealing to us nowadays. Okay, we are not going to the churches anymore, but we do frequent the cinemas. And this is how they get to us. And we even pay money for it. We get the CDs or DVDs and we watch these kind of movies. We get our cable subscription for $140 per month. We fork out that kind of money for them to condition our thinking so that we do what they want us to do. And we pay them for them. How, I don't want to say stupid, but how foolish is that kind of behavior? And they have hooked us. I mean, addiction, I used that term. They have hooked us. We cannot live without watching these kind of movies because they are exciting. Right? Lots of action. And we are getting engrossed by that kind of product, a movie. And all of a sudden we can assume the role of that particular hero. We can become Superman. And what is the message of Superman, right? We evolve into a higher being. And what's the message of Superman? Think about it. Or Spider-Man. All of a sudden I can do things a normal human being cannot do because I evolve into something other. Or injected by some genes, all of a sudden bite of a spider and I have all of these supernatural powers. That's engrossing, exciting. I can perhaps someday become something like that too. I can stab people from a distance and things like that. How exciting can this be? This is the message Sailor Matthews proclaimed already over 100 years ago. He didn't have, not to the extent at least, the means of doing it via movies. He did it by teaching theology students. And obviously he was a proponent of social gospel. It's a whole different story, a whole different subject area. You have to get involved in social action. If you want to evolve into a higher order being, this is the way how you do it. You get active in social action. You help others who are in dire need. You band together with that other church over there, which is a liberal church, okay, but we all want to be involved in doing some good. And I have been in different other churches, traveling the country, and I hear reports from churches. Some of my relatives attend. They put up these huge buildings to have a way to get the young people off the street, and they can play pool and can play these video games. At least we get them off the street, because if they stay on the street, they get into trouble. We do something good. We are engaged in social action. And that makes us feel good, first of all, but we also do something for others. The more we do, the better we get. And the better we get, we are changed, ultimately into something very different, a higher order being. But that message is very popular. It's not just in the emergent church groups. It's not in the liberal churches, even though obviously in both they emphasize this very predominantly, or in liberation theology in Southern America, where the oppressed peasants fight against the big, rich landowners. And we try to help the poor peasants in that fight by purchasing some weapons for them to use and things like that. It's right here. Right. Well, I don't mean right in this church, but in churches like that. In evangelical churches. And it's a very popular message. It becomes more and more popular. The more I listen and hear and read certain articles, the more I realize that this is the way how they do it. Because who could be against doing good, right? Rick Warren said, I don't care what you believe as long as you do good. Because doing good in itself is already something good. And if you do, well, you do something good, which is obviously something which we want you to do. Now, remember what I said initially, it's social control. They don't care ultimately about the poor people around us. They don't care about the youngsters, the teenagers from taking drugs and things like that, or getting in trouble or stealing or whatever. They don't care about them. It's just a means to a different end. This is the means, but the end is to condition your behavior in a certain way, the way they want you to behave. You wouldn't do it unless you would accept their message that this is something good for you to do. And when you say, oh yes, I do believe it's something good, so let's get rolling, let's get engaged, let's get active. It's my decision to do it, right? But ultimately it's someone else whom you have never met wanting you to do this very same thing. And it doesn't stop there, right? Because once again, this is just the hook. They hook you. They get you inside their camp. And you think, oh, this is just based on your own volition. Because you wanted to help other people. So once you're in their camp, they can do anything they want with your life. And that is the evil aspect of it. And they don't tell you this up front, because if they do, you would never jump over the fence, become a participant in that kind of action. They just want to hook you, get you into on their side, and then use you any way they choose to do. So I'm not against, please don't get me wrong, I'm not against doing good to others. Right? And this is not what I'm communicating here. What I'm communicating to you is, don't follow through with their message, which will not end at the border of doing good. It will transcend that into the realm of evil. So he had quite some influence. He was the president of the Federal Council of Churches. This was the initial ecumenical movement organization which was set up in 1908. Now it's called the National Council of Churches, and ultimately evolved into the World Council of Churches. He was the president of the Northern Baptist Convention and so on and so forth. He was the dean of the Divinity School of the University of Chicago. Once again, just a quote from one of his books. I show you the title of The Gospel and the Modern Man. Christians have never had a static system of philosophy or a finished theology. Do we have a closed canon or not? Did God reveal to us all the truths He wanted to give to us in the Bible, or is there still something else we need to know in regards to what God has kept from us up till now? A theological pattern of unchanging content has never existed. When a pattern no longer expresses a religious value or serves as the symbol of a group attitude, it should be and has been abandoned. So what is the final authority? It says God had said. End of discussion. Or is this a group consensus of coming up with a certain conclusion which can be changed and will be changed in the future? What's the authority? Right? If it's the group consensus, which will be always changing, remember, process theology, it's always changing into something else. Well, you may believe something today as being true. Tomorrow it's false. So you believe something today, doing good to others is good. So let's get involved in helping the poor in Haiti. But it never stops there, right? It changes constantly into something else. And you are being changed. Your thinking is being changed alongside that particular change of a group consent. So your thinking is totally, ultimately altered, right? If you allow that influence to have a bearing on your mind is constantly altered. You get from point A to point B over time, and ultimately you may have totally rejected point B as being utter false, like the theosis doctrine. And all of a sudden you realize you have ended up at point B, believing it wholeheartedly as being true. Okay, and I come to a close. I realize I see the clock. And I probably have still 35 slides to go, but I will cut it short here. Yesterday I had 4 hours to speak about ultimately just one topic. Just one topic. And the final punchline was on the very last slide of 4 different presentations of each, perhaps 30 to 40 slides. Some of them were a bit shorter, some of them a bit longer. But the very final slide was the point I wanted to make. And I used 4 hours. 4 hours to build up energy to get to the very final slide. And obviously, the friends back there already know what is coming. And yes, I didn't say it in these words, but this was a message. Asking a question, what is the channel which we expose ourselves just about every day as evangelical Christians here in America? What is the channel where our thinking is conditioned the most in the wrong way? What would you answer to that question? And I spent 4 hours because I knew it's strong tobacco. It's ruffling feathers time. And perhaps you are used to me to do that. What's the punchline? What is the means most American evangelical conservative Christians expose themselves to almost every day, perhaps even several hours every day to get the wrong message? Blasts into their minds, conditioning their thinking and then ultimately conditioning their behavior. What's that channel? And it's a channel. It's a news channel. And it's CNN for sure. It's CBS most certainly. NBC or MSNBC most certainly. But not the channel I have in mind. The channel which is promoting the most outrageous liberal ideas imaginable. The ultra liberal ideas, the liberal ideas which were defined by the Jacobins. The Jacobins were the revolutionary party during the French Revolutionary War. This is why I spent 2 hours just explaining what the original Jacobins in France promoted. Being the most left-wing, they defined left-wing as such. Before that, there was no left wing. They came on the scene and they defined the left wing. Why is it called left wing? Because that particular political party, the Jacobins, or Jacobin Club, as it was called, as a party, a political party, wanted to sit on the left side of the convention, the French convention. Why on the left side? Because they said, well, everyone who believes in the Christian God sits on his right side. Jesus sits on the right side of God. We, as the most dedicated opponents of the Christian God, sit or choose deliberately to sit on the left side of a convention to make a point, you're in utter opposition to the Christian God, to the Christian biblical revelation. This is why we sit on the left side. And they defined left-wing liberalism by sitting on the left side of the convention. This is how it came about. They defined left-wing liberalism, or modernism, or progressivism. And they were very self-conscious in understanding that it is a religion. It is the most successful counter or rival religion to true biblical Christianity. Okay, and then the second two presentations out of the four were explaining how neo-Jacobinism has come to the United States and is promoted by one particular news channel first and foremost. So the very essence of left liberalism is promoted by one news channel first and foremost. It's called Fox News. Fox News. It's the most outrageous, extreme left-wing news channel you have in America. Now, they call themselves conservative, neoconservatives. Right? Most of you believe this is the conservative channel in utter opposition to CNN and all these bad other channels, which are liberal channels. They call themselves every single day, without end, ad nauseum, conservative. We don't like the liberal stuff over here. While in essence, in truth, and I spent 4 hours proving my case, in truth, they are the most outrageous left-wing news channel of America. This is the truth of it. And why don't you believe that? Well, you have perhaps some difficulties believing me in saying it. Because for years, every day, you have listened to that message. Every day you have exposed yourself to that kind of message. You didn't necessarily understand it because it was portrayed to you as conservative politics. But you have believed it. And they condition your thinking. So much so that you are still convinced it's the conservative channel. We have only one. Thankfully, we have that particular channel so that we don't have to listen to CNN and all the others. And they are laughing their bellies off about you thinking they are truly conservative. They in the back rooms, they think, we got them on our side. And they were so easy to deceive. It's incredible. We got them all on our side and they are doing our work. Remember, it's most effective if you believe what you do is your own decision. Right? You're not forced to listen to that news channel. No one forces you. No one forces you to pay $140 per month to have access to Fox News. No one. You pay them to get inside your mind, condition your thinking and your behavior the way they choose to do. And this is the opposite, the very opposite of what the Christian message is. The very opposite. The most extreme opposite message. Neo-Jacobinism. Now check it out. Don't believe a word I say. Check it out for yourself and you will come to the same conclusion. If you spend the time researching it. Let us pray. Lord Jesus, I pray that you guard our minds, our hearts, because out of the heart comes the overflow of life. What we believe determines our behavior. I pray that you help us to spend time in the Word, to spend time studying the Bible, trying to understand the message of the Bible, trying to understand the meaning of God's sovereignty for our own life, for our own Christian walk, for our own churches, for our own families, for our own children. And give us the courage and the power and the determination and the conviction to cut off all these other channels which want to draw us away from you and want to deceive us and do deceive us and want ultimately to destroy our lives, destroy our families, destroy anything which we hold dear. And it's a conscious decision, Lord. And we have to pay a certain price for it. Perhaps the price of ridicule or other means of ostracization, Lord. But we have decided to follow you, and by your grace you have reached in our life and have changed us, have made us into new creatures. The old has passed, the new has come. We look forward to your coming. We look forward to spending eternity in heaven in close communion with you. Lord, I pray that you give us convictions to stand up and hate what you hate and affirm what you cherish. All for your glory, all for the uplifting of your name as the name which is above every name. Amen.